Welcome to the Education Marketing Leader podcast with Chris Raposo. If you're looking to dive into the latest industry insights, draw inspiration from education success stories, or just want to sharpen your marketing skills, you're in the right place. Here, we bring you a diverse range of voices from experts and leaders in the field, offering you a unique blend of professional development and practical strategies. Whether you want to understand your audience better, stay updated with the latest tech trends in marketing, or expand your professional network, we've got you covered. So while you're driving on your morning commute or winding down after a busy day, let's explore the dynamic world of education marketing together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Education Marketing Leader with Chris Raposo. Today, my guest is Craig Chanoff. He is the CEO of Modern Campus, one of the leading higher ed CMS providers and EdTech specialists. Today's topic is on how leadership speed, not workload, determines how fast your organization actually moves. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Good to see you again. I met Craig in person a couple of weeks ago at a higher ed conference in Washington, D.C. We had a good Italian dinner, a good conversation there, and I thought it would be great to have him on the show to share a little bit about his leadership style, his experience. So, Craig, you've led teams across education and tech for years. When you think about leadership today, especially in fast-moving environments, what separates effective leaders from the ones who slow everything down?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you learn early on when you move into management roles and different types of leadership roles as you sort of move around organizations or move up is that leadership, more than anything else, is about adding value. So the question I always sort of have when I'm leading teams is like, where do you need me? Do you need me out in the field working with our sales team and helping sell our products to clients? Do you need me working internally to make our Salesforce.com implementation easier to use? In most cases, leaders have a lot of skills and they can apply them, in a variety of ways. The question is like, where do you spend that time? You usually have about the same number of hours to work as everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so the question is like, how do you add the most amount of value to the organization? A lot of leaders talk about things like high performance and a highly accountable culture, but they never sort of follow up with how that gets done. And I think there's three ways in which, as a leader, I have tried to consistently implement this idea of like a high performance, high accountability culture within the organizations I've led. First, like you have to have goals, right? You create a goals and a goals framework and you set a tone so that everyone knows what's expected of them. Each theme is supported by specific operational goals and success metrics within their organization. And that helps drive like accountability in an organization. It drives efficiency and it makes sure that the success metrics are set up to drive a lot of consistency right across the organization. The second thing is that every leader needs to understand that they're a coach. And I'm going to talk a lot about this during our time together, but coaching is two things. It is training and it is motivation. If someone isn't performing, you need to understand, is it a capability issue? Or is it an issue of motivation? And every manager should have a really good idea of what the strengths and opportunities are of the people that work for them. Mm-hmm. And then the third area I always say is that you have to create an environment of peer-to-peer accountability. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to work across the organization and solve problems. If Susie has a problem with John, Susie can't have to go to their manager, which goes to their manager and comes to me, and then I go down the organization to other John. It doesn't work that way. It's just not going to be an effective way to run the business. But the most important thing is that Susie needs to be able to go to John and offer an opportunity for them to work together through a problem without fear of reprisal, without this worry that John's like, well, Susie, let me tell you something about your organization. And so there has to be a way to do this and work collaboratively through these problems without pulling rank or worried about how people are going to react.
How do managers or leaders motivate their staff if they see a dip in that motivation?
Well, I think ultimately you've got to, spend time with them, right? You have to spend time with those individuals and understand sort of what the root cause is. Again, if it's a capability issue, it's like, okay, well, I need to train you, or I need to get you, more time with this other subject matter expert so that you have that expertise and know exactly what's expected of you. the motivation piece is different. Some people are just like, well, look, like I'm not feeling like my career is progressing here, or I don't feel like the work that I'm doing matters or is making an impact in the organization. And that's the manager's job. The manager's job is to figure out what are those motivating things that the person needs to feel like, hey, like this work matters, this work's making an impact. I feel like I'm growing and developing, professionally. And I've always said that of every, team member that we have, certainly at Modern Campus, and I've said this in other businesses I've worked at, which is that we have a responsibility as leaders to help you grow professionally.
Yeah.
And if however long you are here, whether that's another 3 months, 6 months, 6 years, it doesn't matter. For every moment you're here, we as an organization have a responsibility to help you grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In our pre-interview, you said something that stuck with me. The pace of an organization isn't about how much work there is. It's about how quickly decisions get made. Can you break that down for me? Where do most organizations get that wrong?
Yeah. I cribbed that, by the way, from Brian Chesky, who was the founder of Airbnb, who, took his company obviously through an unbelievably dramatic growth and then survived COVID, where I think they lost like 80% of their revenue overnight and brought it back. And so a lot of respect, for what he was able to do there. First, that line around the pace of an organization is really important because you have to understand why things aren't moving as fast as you want them to. Sometimes it's because you have too many people involved. Like higher ed is notoriously known for making decisions through a lot of consensus and committee. And I understand why, and I empathize with this. Like there are a lot of potential outcomes and impacts on these kinds of decisions for not just organizations, but for the, student experience overall. But it's also why you should support the idea that you want as a few employees as possible. Employees create meetings and decision points, and they do ultimately slow things down. So yes, like what a lot of people get wrong is in being indecisive or not realizing the impact on the decision that they are going to have. But, being too inclusive does make sure that, yes, every voice is heard. But that doesn't mean that like you don't bring those people along. I think one of the critical things that happens in organizations is decisions get made and it is usually followed up with silence versus the idea that you make a decision and then you do the appropriate follow-up. The insecurity and uncertainty from decisions, again, doesn't come from the decision itself. It comes from the fact that a lot of information isn't shared about the why behind it. And as long as leaders and managers are willing to spend that time with individuals to be like, here's why we're going in this direction, and here's the broader context, people usually do buy in. They're very understanding and very professional. But the most important thing about setting the pace is also how involved are you? Right? How involved should you be? I had a leader once who, was, very interested in a new product that we were bringing to market. But I think they participated in like 3 meetings over the course of a year. And they came to me, I remember at the end when the project, of course, had failed and, it didn't really materialize the way that they had expected it to. And they asked me, they were like, what happened here? And I was like, what happened? Change happens when you're an active participant. You drop this problem off on our front doorstep and checked in a few times, and then you can't be surprised that this is the outcome. And so, you've got to be a really active participant as a leader.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of responsibility there as well, to be there. That's a good point, to be active so you can grow along with it, make the changes and the appropriate adjustments if you really bought into the vision of it and know what the target buyer may want, and if it just doesn't go that way, and then after the fact can't really complain about it. But in our pre-interview, again, you shared a story which I really appreciated you sharing with me about realizing that you were the bottleneck, your own hiring process or the company's hiring process. And that's a tough moment for any leader to first realize and then make changes and have the humility to tell everybody, hey, we should do a little bit of different. So how should leaders audit themselves to make sure that they're not the thing that slows the company down?
Well, when you do find, first of all, that you are a bottleneck for a decision, you should make a big deal of it. And the story that I told you, and I'm happy to share it, I did, which was that I found out that I was supposed to interview a candidate, and we couldn't make a decision on a candidate until I had met with them. And I have said to my leaders, I'm like, all of your direct reports work for me too, and I should be involved in the interview process. And then, to find out that, it was weeks away before I was going to meet with this person and I was slowing the business down was really disappointing to me. And so I got my leadership together, and I sort of insisted, saying, hey, listen, this thing just happened and we've solved it, and I'm going to meet with this person tomorrow. But I want to ask you all something, because I remember being at other companies and being like, well, the CEO can't meet with that person for a month. And so I was like, so we're just going to sit on our hands for a month while we wait for the CEO or the president or this leader to have a meeting? Like, come on, can't operate in that way. And to find out that I was that person that was slowing the business down was really disappointing. So my question to my team was like, what else are you waiting on me on?
Right.
What else are the things that need Craig Chanoff to decide on so that we can move the business forward? And I said, by the way, you should feel the same way about yourselves. Like, you shouldn't be a bottleneck for anything around decision makings. And I think one of the most important things that a leader needs to know is that they don't know everything. And that it is really important to surround themselves with smart people that disagree with them. And that if people feel differently about something, then frankly, they have a responsibility to change my mind. And the thing is that you need people around you that are willing to speak truth to power and won't feel like there is any, sort of reprisal, right, associated with that they feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's a big thing that leaders need to do.
Yeah, one of the biggest red flags for me of any organizations is when I encounter a lot of yes men around that leader. And when somebody asks during a meeting if there are any questions, and there's total silence and nobody says anything and I kind of feel like there's probably a little bit of fear involved there, that nobody's welcoming anybody to push the boundaries a little bit respectfully. So just for you to go out there and say, hey, is there anything else I need to know? But first of all, I would like to know, how did you even find out about that bottleneck?
Well, I mean, I asked about, an open role in the organization. It's sort of the normal, business operation stuff. And I think, in this case, I think the manager was probably a little bit, afraid to tell me that, hey, you're the bottleneck. But I certainly, when you press on these things and when you ask the tough questions, you're willing to, people will, ultimately get there, but you've got to be willing to ask. Yeah. In the example you just gave of hey, I announce an initiative, or I challenge people to bring something and it's met with silence, or it's met with, hey, we all think that's a good idea. I think that's where you probably as a leader need to force a different conversation. I do this, tactic at times where I'll go to somebody ahead of time to be like, look, I want you to go do opposition research on this issue. I want you to pick the other side of this topic and defend it in that meeting. And I'm insisting on it because we need to see all the angles, right? And we need to know what other people think, or potentially other outcomes that we could get. Because to your point, if it's just a group of yes people and everyone just sort of locks arms and be like, that's a great idea, let's go, they're probably missing something.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning into the episode today. I hope you're enjoying it so far. This episode is brought to you by Staymates, a full-service marketing agency servicing colleges and universities throughout the country. For more than 40 years, Staymates has helped higher ed institutions strengthen their brands, launch digital campaigns, and drive measurable enrollment growth. From audience research and content strategy to digital design and accessibility, Staymates brings deep expertise and a practical, results-driven approach to every engagement. Looking for a partner who really gets higher education? Learn more at staymates.com. Again, this is staymates.com for more information. And now, back to the episode. It's a good idea. What I also like about certain leaders is when they can read the room. They're in a meeting, they know the topic at hand is an important thing, nobody says anything, and they know some of their strong upcoming leaders to pick them out during the meeting and say, hey, what do you think about that? Because once one person starts talking, usually that's gets the ball rolling and gets the conversation going. So I like to do that during meetings, or if I have a book club, right? I say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I pick everybody out, so it keeps it going. And
Got to be comfortable with calling people out. Yeah, and
You
having
do,
them
you
participate.
do, and some people may find that uncomfortable, but that keeps them on their toes too. When they show up for meetings instead of just cruising. And you see it all the time, right? You see their eyes on the other screen; they don't even pay attention during the meeting. So that'll is one way to make sure everybody's there
Yeah,
mentally.
yeah.
So what do you say to leaders who worry that their expectations may shut people down, especially more of the junior team members?
Yeah, I think the most valuable experience that leaders have is their operating experience. And
Mm-hmm.
being really purposeful about creating a space where people can speak their mind is really important. And it was easier when we were in an office all the time. And I know in the world of remote work, that can be challenging at times. Um, but I think like, going out of your way to sort of force conversations, I think is something that you just have to be really intentional about.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, like recognizing people that are doing really exceptional work, I think is also an important part of this too. Um, there was a story about an HR recruiter at one of the companies I was at that called a meeting because we had lost our entire, product marketing team in the course of a month. And he called a meeting with the head of marketing and the VP that this person reported to. And the recruiter said, I'm not hiring another product marketing person for this company until we get to the bottom of what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Is the job description wrong? Are we not setting the right expectations for what the role is versus what it actually is? And he, took him to task, right? Because this was a failure of leadership. There's no question about it. And I saw him later that day, when I had heard about this discussion, and I was like, Jesse, that is leadership. That's what leaders do. And we complimented him and we made a big deal about that story because I think it's okay that he felt comfortable enough to speak truth to power and say, look, like this is wrong and we're going to end up in the same situation 6 months from now if we don't change this. And I think that was great. Like that was a super intentional conversation on his part. And I think it was important for the company to recognize that he did the right thing. I've done tons of ways to get people to kind of get out of their shell and ensure that they feel like their voice matters. I have a leadership council that I have at Modern Campus where we invest time in the sort of next set of leaders, right, in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and ensure that they feel like they've got not just exposure to me, but they get attentional space where we can talk about things like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, or talk about radical candor, or watch a video together and talk about some leadership principle that they just learned about. And I think creating space for people to do that is just so important for organizations, because then people feel like, oh wow, they're really intentionally taking time to develop me professionally. But it requires that time.
It does, and that's something it's really important to employees. The money aspect is one thing, but then the professional development is another thing that's super important to have that at a company that invests in you and wants you to grow beyond the scope that you brought into the company. I just think is forward thinking and really smart on your part to do that. And I also like the story that you told about that HR person looking at the root problem and the root issue of what's going on. Because I used to work at a law firm. There was a revolving door for staffers. People just came in and out, and they just got fired after a month or two after it didn't work out. And it was a particular team for a particular litigation attorney that constantly went through their legal assistants and paralegals. And I'm thinking to myself, well, they should look at that attorney and see what the issue is. Obviously, nobody would look at that person because that person was one of the rainmakers. So,
Right.
It was part of the structure and the hierarchy there. But I always thought, man, if they would switch it up a little bit there, they probably wouldn't have an issue with the turnover. And then the other thing I really think is great on an employee's perspective to realize that is a disruption in somebody's life if they're leaving or if they're getting fired because they can't perform that particular job because they came in with an expectations and then it was a 180 and said, hey, well, we hired you for this. You thought it was this, but it's actually this. And that person can't do that job. So it's not just a disruption for your business, but that for that person, for their family. And I've seen it all the time. It's really terrible if you go a little bit deeper and go beyond just the scope of your building and your organization to see how it affects the people. that come in and out of your company. And then word of mouth is super important too, right? Because you carry a reputation. If they had a bad experience with your company, that word travels.
I've always sort of taken a perspective that I don't think teams fail because they lack talent. I don't think initiatives fail because it was, a bad idea, or that, the people weren't the right people working on it. I always believe that things fail because people avoid the conversations that unlock potential. And sometimes you need different voices at the table, right? And there has to be trust, between those individuals. But there has to be an understanding that people feel empowered and comfortable to not just work across the organization, but to be able to call things out
Yep.
when things are going off the rails, right? Versus just staying in their remit or staying in their swim lane.
Yeah, yeah. So talking about things going off the rail, but then the opposite, because we also talked about the fact that you shared with me catching people in the act of doing something right. So most people say they want more recognition, but managers still default to only giving feedback when something's wrong. Why does that happen?
Look, I'll go back to my comment I made earlier. Like, manager's job is to be a coach, right? So coaching is motivation and it's training, and a lot of people forget to realize that something good is happening around them, and they end up focusing on the stuff where that people need to improve. And people tend to like want feedback on both, right? They want to know where they're doing well, and they want feedback on areas that they need to grow and develop. And I think people say it. Managers say all the time. They're like, well, I want people who deflect praise and hog criticism, and that's good. That's a good attribute to have. You want that as a leader, and you want people to have that kind of attitude too. But you also have to reward and recognize the behavior that you want to see, because there's nothing more motivating to a team member to be called out for achieving a result, right? There are amazing drivers in the workforce, right? There are drivers and passengers, right? And there are people that work on your teams who are consistently moving the business forward, and they're showing ownership, and they're demonstrating, their potential to take on greater scope and impact. And just using the space to make sure that you call that out is critical. But the timing of that is really important. You don't do that during the performance cycle. You do it in the moment. If someone goes and, crushes a meeting and, gets a great outcome, it's important for the manager quickly to follow up to be like, we need more of that. That is exactly the kind of behavior that we need replicated, and you're setting the right example and tone. And the manager taking time to do that, I think, is just so motivating for the people. And I think it also tells other people what's expected of them.
Absolutely. I do that with my kids all the time. If they do something, I say, good job, do more of this, please. You mentioned earlier in your career you wanted a more positive feedback, but now you value critical feedback more. How should leaders adjust their approach based on where someone is in their career?
Yeah, I think people worry I think managers in general worry that like critical feedback should be like carefully teed up to employees because they're worried about how this is going to react. And I think that's generally true. Like, you do need to be sensitive to it. You don't just throw a right elbow at the end of a meeting and be like, well, that stunk and you didn't deliver that well, or you weren't prepared, and then leave the room. Like, those are thoughtful conversations that you want to have. I think the challenge that individuals sometimes have is that when they receive critical feedback, they think, oh, well, if that's not good enough, that means I'm not good enough. And that is not true. If something isn't good enough and I provide that feedback to you, that's me as a manager saying, I think you're capable of something more. And I care enough to tell you the truth. I had a manager once who came to me and was like, Craig, you need to know that Steve quit. And Steve quit because of you. And he's like, and I don't know, Steve, and I'm not sure whether he was right for our business or not, but you deserve to know that. And I felt really great about the idea that I had a manager who was comfortable enough to come to me to tell me that. And I reflected on it and how I treated Steve, and, whether that was, my fault or not. But I appreciate, and we could debate, the specifics of it, but like, I appreciated the fact that I had a manager who felt comfortable coming to me to tell me the truth. And I think that is something that managers sometimes are afraid of, right? Of coming and telling people how they really feel.
Yeah, because now they're next on the line if they catch you at a bad time.
I don't think like a strong performance culture is one where people should be afraid, right? I think it's one where people feel that there's clarity and
Yeah,
purpose and momentum.
that's
And so I think it's just important for leaders to understand that like the good and bad come with that. The positive feedback and the critical feedback. And critical feedback doesn't mean they're doing something that they don't believe in them anymore. It's just an opportunity for them to learn and grow and get better.
yeah. So when he came to you with that news, did he give a solution as well? Did he just say, "Hey, it's because of you," and left it at that, and you had to
I
figure
think
out?
he, I think he wanted me to reflect on it and come back to him with some thoughts, which I did about like, hey, like, how could I have supported that person better? How
Hmm.
could I have made sure that they felt like I was rooting for them to be successful? And there were definitely some things that I could have done differently to make that situation better.
Hmm.
And the most important thing for me was that someone was willing to come to me and tell me the truth.
That's
And I think there are times in which people again avoid those hard conversations
mhm.
because they're worried about how other people are going to react.
Yeah. So during our pre-podcast conversation, you mentioned the book, The 1 Minute Manager. And it talks about not allowing people to just bring problems without solutions. Tell me a little bit more about that and why that's so important.
Yeah. It's a great story because in that book there's a manager who talks about the fact that like, hey, like if you're just telling me everything that's broken and
Hmm.
you're telling me what this person did wrong and the organization, did wrong, and you don't have any potential solutions or say or follow up with a dot 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 and here's how I think things should be done, then you're just complaining, right? You don't have a real rationale or a way in which the organization should operate, better. And I think one of the most important things as a manager is to encourage and coach people into the idea that like, yeah, you're exposed to problems all the time. You see where everything is broken in the business. You're an enrollment counselor, you're working on a marketing campaign. You see the ugly, right? But it's your opportunity to then not just raise your hand to be like, well, this is broke and it's somebody else's fault, but actually say, hey, listen, I'm going to work across the business and I'm going to make this better. And I think that's what managers are looking for, right? Those are who the leaders are, the people that are willing to kind of stretch out and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a while ago, I came across a situation where a teammate was called out publicly in one of our Slack channels, and it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit because it could have been a personal message to that particular individual. So I went to my boss and said, maybe we should have a professional etiquette training to praise in public and correct in private. I don't know if it's ever went anywhere, but that's how I feel strongly about, and sometimes that's needed.
Yeah, it's part of you and I talked about this a bit, like it's about those durable skills,
Hmm.
right? That people need to have. I was at a conference recently and there was a bunch of employers in the room and the person who was running the session was, having sort of a survey done around employers and talking about durable skills. And they asked everyone in the room to raise their hand if they had fired someone in the last year. And of course, like these were all management and business people, and we all had. So we raised our hands, and then they said, "Did you let them go because they didn't have a technical qualification, or they couldn't figure out a specific, product or tool, and or did you let them go because they didn't know how to get along with people in the workplace?"
Hmm.
Or they didn't know how to communicate effectively, or they didn't know how to raise those problems, or they humiliated or embarrassed colleagues because they didn't know how to give feedback. And that is a perfect example of where you just called that out, where I think people need that level of called training, but I think it's just coaching, right? Of just like, here's how you handle these kinds of situations more effectively.
Yeah. Do you think when it comes to higher education, because we both work in this space, do you think that higher education is doing enough to prepare students for those kinds of durable skills, or are they still over indexing on technical skills?
I mean, I think I worry that we are over indexing to giving people very specific technical knowledge and skills that they need to accomplish some kind of credential. and we're focusing less on the things that that I think, frankly, like are more applicable and needed in the workplace today, right? Like I'm constantly testing for two things when it comes to hiring people out of college, right? In particular, but even people with certain years of experience. I test for adaptability and I test for a passion of learning. Tell me about a time that you had to learn something new, completely under new pressure. What was the approach and the steps that you took? Describe a situation where your plan failed. What did you do next? And I always say, like, I'm always looking for people that know how to work well across the business. And so having to sort of understand, like, how do you adapt in different environments is a big piece. And I think that skill is learned through project work and through, different types of things that happen within a course experience. But I think sometimes we rely on them less because maybe they're more subjective to measure than, the technical skill that they learn. So we need both.
Absolutely. For leaders listening to this who feel like their organization is moving too slow right now, what's one thing they should do this week to change that?
There's a great viral video from a few years ago by Kara Lawson, who was the Duke University basketball women's coach. And the video was about like how to handle hard better. And she said that any meaningful pursuit in life will never be easy. And I think that question that you just asked is a really tough question for leaders to take on, which is like, what can I do right now, right, to change my organization and make it better? And I will continue to sort of reinforce that leaders need to understand that their most valuable experience is their operating experience and what they have done in the past. Find a problem in your organization. There's tons of them, right? And show people what it takes to solve that problem that isn't even in your remit. Be a mentor, like help somebody, right, who clearly is struggling or needs some, more attention. Get involved, like drive difficult conversations. Adapt, right, to different environments with influence, right, rather than sort of reacting, right? Encourage those peer-to-peer relationships and recognize people have different roles and responsibilities and don't necessarily just pull rank and be like, well, I'm me and you're you, and this is the direction we're going to go. There's a great line, which is that the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. And I think it's really important for people to just get through that front door and try to start to make change. And I think that there's a flywheel effect and momentum that occurs as a result.
Great episode, Craig. Tell us a little bit more about Modern Campus and how people can connect with you after this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So higher education, has obviously an incredible mission, right? It's there to prepare students for success in life, in the workplace, in the community, and in their personal lives. But it is clear also that the environment around higher education and how they operate is changing rapidly. Enrollment patterns are shifting, funding pressures are increasing, accountability is higher than ever before. And institutions need to stand out and they need to support and engage their learners differently because learners expect more. They expect an on-demand experience, and you have to be really intentional about the kind of interactions that you're going to have with them because they want flexibility and convenience. And most higher education systems haven't been built for this reality. Institutions design their systems for a pretty simple model, which is serving traditional and undergraduate and graduate students. But now we're supporting 5 generations of learners simultaneously across dual enrollment and continuing ed and micro-credentials and lifelong learners. Modern Campus helps institutions engage with learners that are really setting up to be learners for life. We provide technology that helps institutions engage with students in a personalized way, from the first interaction all the way to getting a credential. Engagement isn't just a moment, it's a continuous relationship. We have flexible technology that helps with program discovery and registration and enrollment, particularly for continuing ed audiences. We support learner progression with pathways and scheduling and academic planning tools. We power engagement through targeted communications, web experiences, real-time insights. And we're really proud to build this very connected infrastructure and helping institutions modernize that learner experience and drive enrollment and retention and support success at every stage of the experience. if anyone's interested in connecting with us, sales@moderncampus.com. We'd be happy to connect with you.
Awesome. And how about you? LinkedIn is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Or Craig@moderncampus.com. I'm happy to take an inbound email and happy to set up a call. So
Awesome, Craig. Thank you so much for your time, sharing about your leadership experience, helping other leaders progress in their career. Really appreciate you.
thanks, Chris. Appreciate you.
And that's a wrap for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Education Marketing Leader Podcast this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your friends and your network. And if you ever thought about starting your own podcast, now that you listen to one and you got inspired, reach out to me via DM. We'd love to help you launch your own. We'll take care of everything for you, the scripting, the strategy, the editing, the distribution. All you have to do is show up, connect with your audience, and build your personal brand. So if you're ready for it, let's chat. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time at the Education Marketing Leader Podcast. Take care, friends.